One of the biggest mysteries in all of Star Wars lore is when it was finally revealed that Jango Fett was working with the Separatists and had allied against them. Why did the Jedi and the Council still trust the clones that was made from his template? Well, my friends, we've searched through the lore, and today we want to answer that question. During the Battle of Geonosis, the Jedi survivors of the arena event were rescued by a surprise army of clone troopers, which Kenobi had discovered earlier on Kamino, while they took advantage of this army to turn the tables on the Separatists. Why did they go with the most short-sighted option of actually trusting this clone army to fight alongside them, especially since they were created from the Separatist allied bounty hunter Jango Fett, and their creation was shrouded in mystery and even parts of the dark side? It wasn't as if Jango was simply a contract of the Confederacy. He was actively taking actions against the Republic, attempting to assassinate senators such as Amidala, resisting Jedi arrest, and even fighting Kenobi with lethal intent, aiding in the capture of Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Padme. It was very clear that Jango Fett was on Dooku's payroll and had no love for the Republic nor the Jedi. So why did the Jedi trust his clones, which now made up the Grand Army of the Republic? This has been a question that has severely bothered many of us watching, as it seems like the most brain-dead decision the Jedi could have ever made was to trust the clones of one of their greatest enemies. But in today's Holocron, we are going to discuss this strange choice made by the Council and attempt to explain why their thought process behind trusting the clones may have actually made some sense. Before we jump into our list of reasons, we need to make something very clear. The Jedi were not without their suspicions of the clones. In fact, we know that the Council was on top of the Inquisition into the clone army. The Kaminoans were questioned extensively, and Plo Koon reopened the cold case of Sifo Dyas's death, as well as Shaak Ti sent personally to oversee the creation and training of the clones on Kamino. With a member of the High Council being present at the cloning facility, this gave the Council some peace of mind that no funny business or betrayals were occurring, with one of the major flaws being, though, that they did not look into the clones' creation, as the inhibitor chips were placed years prior. Not all Jedi generals who joined the war were trusting of the clones, with a few outright refusing to work with them at all. A good example of this is Legends General Ram Koda, who hated the clones to the point where he insisted on recruiting his own militia to fight against the Confederacy instead. By doing so, he was saved from the initial wave of Order 66 and the Purge, but once the Jedi found the time to thoroughly look through the clones, they found no reason not to trust them, specifically given the 4 reasons that we've prepared for you today. The first of which we have titled Necessity. Let's get the obvious out of the way. With one of the Jedi's own fallen masters now at the helm of a political uprising as Dooku, tensions were at an all-time high when Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Senator Amidala had been unlawfully arrested. The act of Dooku performing an illegal execution had now breached too many laws to ignore. Arriving at the arena with a staggering 200 Jedi, the Jedi were hoping for an immediate surrender once the Geonosians and Dooku saw the sheer number of Jedi present. However, the Jedi would be the ones surprised and outnumbered as Dooku unveiled the Separatist droid army. It was clear that Dooku was ready for the war and the Jedi were not. Dooku played on their arrogance. In a humiliating turn of events, what was supposed to be a battle would become a massacre. Over 3/4 of the Jedi present would be murdered, gunned down in an overwhelming hail of blaster fire. But by the time they were rescued by Yoda, swinging in with a shiny, battle-ready army, at this moment, the Jedi made the obvious choice to trust the clone troopers so long as they could finish the battle on Geonosis. But what happened after Geonosis? The issue was the Republic found themselves outplayed. The CIS droid army was ready, having clearly been anticipating and preparing for war over many years. Millions of droid units were ready for deployment, and the Republic hadn't been taking their separatist movement seriously, but now they were going to regret it. With complicated laws still in place that disallowed the Republic to issue a draft, and no time at all to train fresh troops or manufacture supplies for all of them, they had nowhere to turn but to this free army. Palpatine had played his hand masterfully, and unfortunately, the Jedi were faced with no choice but to embrace the clones. It was either use the clone troopers, or potentially millions were going to die. But many still reject this reasoning, saying that the Jedi should have been more insightful, and this is obviously correct. But let's move on, and perhaps one of the major reasons why the clones were trusted immediately. Number 2, we have titled Sifo-Dyas. It was known in the council chambers that the clone army had been commissioned by one of their own, the Jedi Master Sifo-Dyas. While this was an action taken completely outside of the council's rule, the Jedi found some solace in knowing that one of their own was the one who commissioned the army in the first place. As far as the High Council went, they remembered a time when Sifo-Dyas had terrifying visions of a coming war, even naming it a clone war. He was assumed to be the first of all the Jedi to have these visions, and our personal opinion for why this is could be traced to his friendship with Dooku. The Force used their close bond to grant Dyas a vision and what was going to result in Dooku over time. At the moment, he was a part of the council, and when he consistently brought his concerns to the rest of the council members, they voted him to be removed from his seat. It was after these events when he was given the mission from Chancellor Valorum to broker a peace treaty between the Republic and the Pike Syndicate. And as we know, it was by Dooku's orders that the Pike shot down his ship on Obadiah. Dooku would enter the temple and change Sifo-Dyas' last mission in the log to that of Felucia, erasing Kamino completely from the archives. The Jedi High Council would later remember when Sifo-Dyas had brought up his visions about the coming war, so they understood in retrospect that he had commissioned the army without their permission. Thankful to him in hindsight, the council decided to honor the memory of Sifo-Dyas and use the army that he provided, even if they did not trust it completely. The third is also massively important, and we have titled it The Jedi's Ability to Sense the Clone's Intent. It wasn't just a matter that the clones were free, or that they had been commissioned by a Jedi, but the clones presented themselves as friendly, obedient, and well-trained. They took to the command of their Jedi generals without a single question, and on Geonosis, the Jedi generals were quickly chosen from the council members present at the time, with squads of clones that were sloppily put together in order to mount a counter-offensive. The quick action and competency of the clones more than proved their battle-ready attitude and their respect for their new commanders, something no other army could have jumped into so seamlessly. Beyond this, Yoda himself gives a fantastic insight into his reasoning for trusting the clones. In the very first episode of the Clone Wars titled Ambush, Yoda is within a cave talking to his personal squadron consisting of Thyre, Jack, and Rise. When Yoda asks to see their faces, the troopers remove their helmets and remark that there's nothing special to see, that they all look the same. But then Yoda says this: "Deceive you eyes can. In the Force, very different each of you are." Yoda, among other Jedi, realized that the clones were not just droids, they were living beings. Yoda could literally sense their souls, and determined that despite being clones of Jango Fett, each one of them had their own mind, personality, and will. While he had no idea about the inhibitor chips which could override all of this, the point stands that not only did the clones act friendly and obedient, but the Jedi could sense that this was all genuine. As we know, the clones really did care for their Jedi commanders and were kind to them. They cared for the Republic, and they deeply cared for one another. As part of Sidious's plan, he allowed the clones to actually be themselves until the final moment of betrayal, twisting the knife as it entered the Republic's flesh, stripping these honorable warriors of everything that they knew, taking away from them their soul. Palpatine executed his plan based on the trust built between the Jedi and the clones. The Sith knew that even with the veil of the dark side clouding the Jedi's vision, they could sense danger from within those that stood right beside them. As such, it was paramount that the clones had free will to create a very tangible relationship and friendship. All suspicion would be erased. In fact, for a handful of clones, this worked too well. The majority of the Bad Batch, Fives, Echo, and Rex all had their inhibitor chips removed when they learned of them, horrified that they would be programmed to betray the Republic and their Jedi friends. And now finally, we come to the final reason. We have titled The Veil of the Dark Side. We bring this up often, but it really should not be ignored when speaking of the Jedi's shortcomings during the war. Sidious's veil clouded the vision and kept them from properly seeing the future. Even if a few Jedi could break through this cloud, their visions were muddy and not easily understood. When it came to the Grand Army of the Republic, a fresh Jedi, free from the dark veil, would undoubtedly be able to sense massive amounts of danger in the Force. Alarm bells would go off to the clones. Without this veil, the Jedi can see vaguely where the future will lead. The Clone War beginning suddenly made them panic and put them in a place where they had to choose quickly. Not only was the veil working against them, but so was time and urgency. The tremor and danger given to the Jedi through the Force was either not heard or more than likely attributed to the war, not the clone army. And that, my friends, were the reasons why the Jedi rapidly accepted the clones of Jango Fett completely with open arms. Since the Jedi had each of these reasonings to go off of, along with their senses, they understood that Jango Fett was nothing more than a bounty hunter, and that the clones were different men. Good men that were commissioned by a Jedi Master. They only used his DNA, not his soul. But what do you think of this, my friends? Do you accept this reasoning, or do you still think that it is ridiculous that the Jedi so quickly trusted the clones? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, may the Force be with you.